our next speaker, Jay Satterfield, who is head of the Rauner Special Collections Library at Dartmouth College. And it came to Dartmouth in 2004. Before that, he received a doctorate in American Studies from the University of Iowa and also published a book entitled Books for the World, Truth, Culture, and the Modern Library, published by the University of Massachusetts Press in 2002. And since he arrived at Dartmouth in 2004, Jay has spent a great deal of time integrating special collections with the intellectual life of the Dartmouth campus, and that ties in with the title of his talk today, which is Considering the Present, Special Collections Are the Meal, Not the Dessert. Please welcome Jay Satterfield.
Thank you. Sarah, I have to start with your Siberia, because 5 years ago we started a blog at Rauner Library, and we were trying to figure out what to call it. And we were all sort of sitting around thinking, well, I don't know, we could, all sorts of different ideas came up. And I said, we just want to blog like 2 or 3 cool things a week. So we decided to call it Cool at Rauner. And then I thought of Siberia. It's not that kind of cool. It's the good kind of cool. So, but we don't consider ourselves relegated into the prison camps of the Soviet Union. What I want to talk to you about today is the role of special collections in the intellectual life of the university. Specifically, how to shape our roles and our approach to our collections, to enhance curricular involvement, and to facilitate more active use of our collections. Whenever I'm getting a particularly delicate item for somebody, I set it up in a cradle at his or her table, and then often with a little flourish, I joke, "Hi, my name is Jay, and I'll be your server today. I hope you enjoy your book." It's a nice way to break the intimidating formality that may have crept into the situation. And it fits perfectly with the title of the talk today, Special Collections Are the Meal, Not the Dessert. But it also fits with our most basic philosophy at Rauner Special Collections Library at Dartmouth College. We want using special collections to be a mundane act, like going to the local college restaurant and getting some lunch. We want students to see that an item is located in special collections and think, no big deal, and head on over. There shouldn't be any hassles involved. At the same time, we want them to absolutely love the experience. So much so that when they step out the door, they have to stop on the steps of the building and call their parents because they can't believe what they were just able to do. We want mundane boredom punctuated with an exquisite and transcendent moment. Think of it as a really good meal at a casual diner. We're not all the way there, that's for sure. Lots of people are still nervous about using special collections, but we have made structural changes to reduce that fear. 10 years ago, we made a conscious decision to remake ourselves. We had great collections, especially for an institution of our size. Dartmouth has been around for a long time, and for about half of its history, it's been a wealthy institution. It has a long tradition of nurturing a devoted alumni base, eager to give back, that dates at least to Daniel Webster, who passionately argued for Dartmouth's institutional independence before the Supreme Court in 1819. As a result of over 2 centuries of devoted alumni building up impressive private collections and then donating them to Dartmouth, then helping us build endowments for collection development, we have collections that can really work for us. We have a beautiful facility, but other than serving a few devoted faculty, some visiting researchers, and some a pretty empty reading room. That's what you see here. So we only had a few devoted faculty, some visiting researchers, and some adventurous students. The collections weren't coming anywhere near to achieving their potential. When I got there, I had somewhat narrowly conceived of special collections as a center for the curriculum. The college archivist, Peter Carini, quickly humbled me by aiming higher and being far more eloquent in stating, "No, we should become the center for the intellectual life of the college." That really resonated with our staff, whom had been hungering to share their deep knowledge and appreciation of the collections. They saw an opportunity to blow open the doors to the building, which, as you can see, has some qualities of a mausoleum from the outside. and turned the campus on to the amazingly cool materials held within. Without that immediate and full embrace by our staff, I'm not sure what we would have been able to achieve. But with it, we went from hosting 5 or 6 classes a year in a sleepy reading room to the point where 2 years ago, we had to add a 3rd classroom to accommodate demand. Last year, 115 different classes, accounting for 265 individual sessions, used the collections directly. These classes came from 25 different departments, and there are only 44 departments at Dartmouth. And they brought in over 1,600 unique students. So 1,600 students who, counting, no repeats in that. And that's on a campus with only 4,200 students. Over a third of the student body was in last year, and that was just for classes. We're nearing a saturation of the curriculum and approaching our goal that we once thought of as a purely aspirational pipe dream, that every student, by the time they graduate from Dartmouth, will have had a meaningful encounter with our materials. By meaningful, we mean in their hands, in close interrogation, and learning from the objects. Last month, I even worked with a computer science class on computational fabrication. Oh, wait, that was our full reading room. On computational fabrication, which is 3D printing. And we use books that do something interesting with 3-dimensional space within the confines of the printed page, or in this case, the laser cut page. Over the course of their 4 years of college, we're getting close to catching all the students this way. Our first step was a controversial one. We're not a small place. We have an FTE of 13, but neither are we one of the colossal players in the special collections world. The curatorial model, one with one curator responsible for the archives, another for the rare books, and a third for the manuscripts, did not seem suited to an institution of our size with collections of our scope. Nor did it fit with our vision of fully integrating the collections. Dartmouth as an institution always straddles this line between aspirations, resources, and faculty of a major research library, major research university, with the ideal of a small liberal arts college devoted to excellence in undergraduate education. We feel the same pressure in special collections, and we needed a structure to align ourselves better with that larger institutional goal. So we dumped the curatorial model, and we moved to a functional model. One person is head of the department with major administrative functions, another in charge of all the processing activities, and a third focused on reader services. All 3 devote considerable time and energy to outreach and education by pushing the collections into the intellectual life of the college. We all teach a lot. I'm not the curator of anything, though, nor are any of my cohorts in special collections. 3 of us are empowered to make collection development decisions, but we take advice broadly. We have a loose division of duties in collection development based on our expertise, but the lines are permeable and create ample opportunities to discuss potential acquisitions from multiple viewpoints. The routing slips in our Dior catalogs are really long, and they include any member of the staff that wants to see them. In fact, last month, we bought a manuscript diary based on an intern's recommendation. She came to me, she was like last person on the list, and she came to me and she said, "You should buy this diary." And I said, "Do some research on it and make the case." And she did, and she went off. She made a great case for why I should buy it. I bought it, and then last week, a student came into the reading room and said, "I need an early 19th century travel diary, but not one that has blah, blah, blah." And it was perfect. I said, "You won't believe it, we just bought one." It was a perfect fit, and the reason it worked was because she just graduated in July. She's really close to the curriculum in a different way than I am, and she's really close to the interests of the student body. So having her make that recommendation, we didn't let her buy it, but we did the actual acquisition. Actually, I had her do some of the dealings with the dealer just to give her some experience of the back and forth between that. So anyway, while most of our decisions are made by a few people, a lot contribute. We felt the curatorial model was limiting librarians' roles, siloing collections, discouraging the creative use of materials across collections, and hampering access. Many curators fall into the trap of thinking in the possessive, and their position descriptions and reward structures encourage this. They talk of my collections and my faculty. At Dartmouth, we have collections and we have users. Since we made the shift to the functional model, user satisfaction and overall use of the collections has risen. Class use has exploded. User satisfaction and overall use of the collections has risen. And in parallel, good news, our processing backlog has shrunk to a fraction of what it was, and we're no longer adding to that backlog. Not answering to multiple curators with differing priorities has helped the processing staff get work done far more efficiently. Also, we never faced the problem of a rare book curator holding a manuscript in her hand with a puzzled look, or a modern manuscript collector ignoring a pile of books in his office that arrived with a new manuscript collection because neither had the energy to cross those boundaries to get them processed. We think it was the right move. The functional model freed us and opened up our collections. I want to go through a class session with you I think is indicative of the benefits we gained by dropping the curatorial territoriality. It's a class session that employs materials from the college archives, the rare book collections, and the manuscript collections to build out an historical narrative. It's very much an active learning exercise where the students have ownership of the materials and the story that emerges from them. For a class of 16 students, we selected 8 items on a common theme. We don't explain how the documents are related. We simply give them to the students. 1 item for every 2 people. We ask each pair of students to do 3 seemingly simple things. First, they need to identify the item. That is, what is it? A letter, a picture, a book. Second, they need to tell the class the object's information value. In other words, what is it telling them? And third, and this is crucial, explain what questions the document leads them to ask. What do they want to know more about after having read it? So first, we have a petition from January 1777. You guys can't read it, I'm sure. Neither can the students. We offer a transcription with this. It's signed by several students, Dartmouth students, to the town of Hanover, asking permission to inoculate themselves from smallpox, which has recently entered the area. The document also has a response from the town select board granting the permission as long as the students isolate themselves in a house just over the town line in rural Lebanon, New Hampshire. So get out of town and you can do it. The next group gets a prescription from a Dr. Tiffany, dated January 1777, for a mixture to be taken 2 weeks prior to inoculation. The prescription results in a fairly strong purging of the system, I am told. Then we have a letter from Ebenezer Hazeltine, dated February 12th, 1777. It's a letter to his brother explaining that he was recently inoculated for smallpox. It relays that a group of the scholars were inoculated and came through just fine, but a Native American girl who had been serving them caught it the natural way and took it back home to her family. This is William Douglas's summary, historical and political, of the first planting, progressive improvements, and present state of the British settlements in North America from 1753. We bookmarked a digression concerning smallpox that presents statistical information on the prevalence of the disease in the colonies. This is one of my favorite things in the collection. It's the first law book published for the new state of New Hampshire, printed in Exeter in 1780. I love how the title page really asserts the state's independence and its American origins. The students see, in order, the first laws passed by the state after the Declaration of Independence, including one passed in December of 1776, a couple weeks before these other items, designed to prevent the spread of smallpox. It states that no one may be inoculated without first getting the permission of the town's select board. Failure to do so will result in a fine of 30 pounds, which we figured out is about 3 times the annual wages of a sergeant in the British Army at the time. Another group gets a 1765 edition of the life of the late Reverend, learned, and pious Mr. Jonathan Edwards. They don't all know who Edwards is. Doesn't really matter that much. But because the passage we mark explains that he became president of what would become Princeton University, was inoculated for smallpox as a preventative, and complications set in and he died. The last two groups get two related pieces, and they're a little bit older. These are two pieces from 1722 that are part of a pamphlet war debating the effectiveness and morality of inoculation. Benjamin Coleman's narrative of the method and success of inoculating the smallpox in New England, and Leonard Sparham's reasons against the practice of inoculating the smallpox, also 1722. You can probably see what's happening. We give the students about 15 minutes working with the documents in pairs. Then we go around the room, and each pair reports out to the class. First, what is it? Second, what does it tell them? And third, what questions do they have? Ideally, and it usually works, the questions the first group have are answered by the documents in the hands of the fifth group, whose questions are answered by the document with the eighth group, whose questions are partially answered by the fourth group and the seventh group. You can see where all of this is going. The documents form a web of context and meaning that contribute to a narrative that relates to smallpox in Dartmouth's past. After everyone has presented, during which a lot of connections have become apparent and at least a few students begin to wiggle with excitement, we ask for one volunteer to tell the story. I've done this dozens of times with different suites of material. We call these teachable packages, and never have had any trouble getting a volunteer. I usually have several. We pick one person, and he or she pieces together a disjointed, moderately accurate story that ties the documents together. In this case, that a smallpox epidemic hit the Hanover area in 1777, and several Dartmouth students decided to take the inoculation. They were isolated, did the inoculation, and came out all right, although one local from the town who was serving them got sick and spread the illness to her house. Also, that for some reason, inoculation was dangerous, controversial, and regulated by law. They miss some things, and they make some outlandish assumptions. They often confuse inoculation, which is a nasty thing where you introduce the live pathogen into a scratch, with vaccination, which is not invented for another 30 years or so, which is far safer. A few sources, like the history of the colonies or the life of Edwards, might get left out of that narrative altogether. The story is incomplete and has at least a few serious errors in it. That's when we get to work as a class. After congratulating the brave student for doing such a good job, we ask the class to build on the narrative and correct it and improve it. After hearing one student relate the story, others see new bits of information in their documents that contribute to the narrative. They're able to make new connections and add to the story. It's usually about this point that someone figures out that the letter about inoculation was signed by one of the original petitioners. And people start to put the dates together, and the less obviously connected sources begin to come into play. By the end of the class, we've usually done a pretty good job of getting an accurate story told, acknowledging what we don't know and where we made assumptions that need to be verified from other sources. We also talk about the value of secondary sources here that can be used alongside these primary sources. The session works for a couple of reasons. First, there's no curator interpreting the story. Nobody in the room is playing the role of expert that the students can rely on. They are responsible for the narrative, and they own it. Second, we love to use exercises like this in freshman writing classes. The students are excited about their new home at Dartmouth and hungry for information about its past. They are literally within a few hundred yards of where many of these documents were produced 235 years ago by people who, in one small way, were just like them. And they are deeply intrigued with the history of the place. The aura of the original is another motivator. They have the real thing in hand, and they value its information more than if it were a photocopy or a digital surrogate, something that we actually interrogate in the class of why do you believe this more? But most importantly, they're in an arena of communal discovery. They might be working in pairs, but they're building the story together as a whole class. The session really has nothing to do with smallpox or Dartmouth history. It's about the students learning how primary sources work, how they can tell you so much in context and so little in isolation, how they can bring clarity and bring confusion, and how they are dependent on each other for their meaning. The thrill of discovery and interconnectivity is present in everything they're doing in the class. The lesson for special collections is that history is not written just from rare books, just from institutional records, or just manuscript collections. The integration of these sources is essential for building out this class. Students and scholars should not see them in isolation, and we should strive to avoid institutional structures that create that isolation. We all know this, but we also all know individual curators who undermine this holistic approach to our collections. In a very real way, having dropped the curatorial model allowed me the freedom to assemble this class. It also drove me all through the department talking with different staff members. I needed a document that told me this. I needed another kind of source that told me this. And in order to do that, I drew on the expertise of the entire staff. Just as the students created meaning out of the documents by working together, we built that session collaboratively across what some would consider curatorial boundaries. Interestingly, the last item, I still have it up. The last item here, we didn't own it when I first taught the class. I saw it in a Dior catalog a few months later and snapped it up for the connections it would make, and knowing how well it would interact with the college archives. We're constantly on the lookout for these stories in the collection that can be spun out, like the smallpox exercise. And we shop for an item or two that will transform them into those teachable packages. Our collection development is shaped by these needs that cross these curatorial boundaries. A parallel to subjugating curatorial control is played out in the relinquishing of control in the classroom experience to the students. Morgan Swan, who's our education and outreach librarian, calls the process of the class I just described as exuberant chaos. And he's a big advocate for embracing it. It's a concept that freaks out a lot of special collections librarians. Most of us are into the exuberant side of things. We're all junkies for that moment of turning on somebody to something really amazing in our collections. There's a kind of contact high watching someone see Hooke's Micrographia for the first time, which I just realized made this bizarre connection a few weeks ago, that it was published in London during the Great Plague, and it's The Flea. It freaked me out when I realized that. Or reading a cranky letter from Ezra Pound to Robert Frost. I don't know how well you guys can see this, but the last line of it is, "I had recognized your limitations as a writer, but had hitherto considered you a man, not a shit. EP." Great way to teach modern poetry. Or just handle a 600-year-old manuscript. We all know that feeling. We start to get jaded in our daily interactions with our books and documents, but the rush of an undergraduate on rare materials jolts us back in time and space just like it carries them to a new place. But chaos, well, that's not usually associated with the rarefied air of special collections. It should be. Chaos is a space where people overcome inhibitions and open themselves to new experiences and learning. Think of it as a moment of anti-structure in your overly structured day, where things are turned on their heads, where the students run the class, and the conversation is based on what they are experiencing. The librarian's role is to pluck out the moments of clarity and reiterate them, add bits and pieces of context to allow the students' observations to mature into something beyond an initial impression, and most importantly, let the experiential moment define the class. It's harder than what a lot of us are used to. When we present materials, sort of like what I just did with the smallpox documents, we have loads of control. We dictate the pace. We highlight the parts of each object that we want the students to see. We make sure that we come to some conclusions that we feel are important. And we don't need to worry about ideas flying out of left field to disrupt our end goals. But with exuberant chaos, which really is just another way of saying active learning, but expressed in a more lively way, it is special collections after all. Our control is gone. We don't really know where the classes will go. And we have to be on our toes every second to follow along and grab what we can. That's hard for a lot of people. We know why a certain object is super cool. And we could talk for hours about the awesomeness of something like the Nuremberg Chronicle. Or a little pamphlet from the Zoot Suit riots. Or Lewis Carroll's Alice as a 1920s flapper. But we have to subjugate that impulse and let the students find a fragment of that awesomeness and make it their own. That's hard. Watching them miss something about a book or a manuscript that we think is really important. That's chaotic, but that's learning. Old school show and tell is really fun for students and allows us to share our deep knowledge of the collections, but I doubt much actual learning occurs. Selection of materials becomes crucial. There's a lot of upfront work involved in assembling something like the smallpox exercise, and this is where we are curators of another sort, assembling materials from across collections to tell a story, not unlike doing an exhibit, but without item labels or text. There are so many documents, but which 8 will do the job? None of them should tell too much, but each should contribute in its own unique way. The teaching, the control we're used to, takes place well before the session, when we load the dice with a selection of materials that takes students in the right direction and facilitates their discoveries. The teaching is done outside of the classroom. Inside the classroom is where learning occurs. This plays out in the digital world as well, I think. Dartmouth is fortunate to have a fabulous polar research collection, the Stephenson Collection. There's a large class taught each year in environmental studies called Pole to Pole. The culminating research project has each student write a paper on a contemporary issue related to the Arctic or Antarctic that they must set into an historical context. The faculty member requires that at least 2 of the sources come from the Stephenson Collection. There are usually around 70 students in the class, so every May we get completely mobbed. A few years ago, with the help of a grant from the Delmos Foundation, we digitized the Encyclopedia Arctica. It's a 15,000-page draft of an encyclopedia commissioned by the US Navy, edited by Stephenson. It was almost completed in 1951, when the Navy pulled the plug on the project because of Stephenson's loose ties to the Communist Party. Ironically, the Navy wanted the encyclopedia created because of the growing importance of the Arctic during the Cold War, but it was Cold War paranoia that killed it. It's a terrific window into what exactly was known about the Arctic regions in 1951. Much to the students' delight, and to our relief, the unpublished encyclopedia can count as one of their sources. Since we digitized the Encyclopedia Arctica and made it keyword searchable, we digitized it first just as PDF page images, and boy, did that have bad user satisfaction. Then we sent it out and had the whole thing rekeyed, and because it was on onion skin, it was a draft, and we had it rekeyed, and now it's completely keyword searchable. So since we digitized it and made it keyword searchable, the students have produced better papers and have gone into much more depth. They used to come to us with an idea, but with little notion of how to set it into any context. We always had a session with the class devoted to the physical objects, where we showed them materials from the collection. Photographs, ephemera, manuscript diaries, and printed books. We showed them these to give them ideas about how to make sense of the materials and what to do with them. But with a class that large, it was difficult to do anything interactive like the smallpox exercise. Now they use the Encyclopedia Arctica at all hours of the day and night to investigate their topics. And by the time they come to special collections, they have a context and a narrowly defined researchable question that we can help them explore more fully in the Stephenson Collection. So they're using the collection far better now because they're coming in with the base knowledge that they need to exploit those rare materials. The faculty member who teaches the class commented that after we made the encyclopedia keyword searchable, the papers improved dramatically, and the overall depth of research surpassed his expectations. I think it helps that we're not mediating the experience with the Encyclopedia Arctica. They stumble through a somewhat confusing source, having a moment of perhaps not so exuberant chaos of their own. But from that struggle, they're finding the questions they really want to research. I think there are some other parallels in our philosophy of letting go in the classroom that resonate with the other work we do. I'm not sure how many of you were at RBMS last June, but Michelle Light from UNLV made a very persuasive case for letting go of any rights enforcement we do. Stop requiring people to ask permission to use images from our collections, and stop charging use fees. We have to continually push back on copyright holders who want collections locked down. As we digitize our collections, we should open them as widely as possible and create the structures for creative, easy, and free use and reuse of the materials. Dartmouth puts most of its collections right now into Content DM. It holds materials and allows you to download, but it puts them into a narrow silo that's not indexed by Google. If you search for a collection that's digitized, you'll find it. But basically, we've hidden the individual items from the search engines and therefore hidden them from most of the world. So we need to improve that. When we first put up digital collections, I don't know about all of you, but I was really hung up on providing layers of context so people would read the documents the correct way. The digital was just another realm for us to show our collections. Only recently have I been able to let go of that notion, long after I let go of it in the classroom. People will make of the materials what they will. Through creative reuse of digitized collections, they will build multiple contexts around materials that bring new meaning. We were pretty much always cool with that in the reading room, with lone scholars. But it made a lot of us nervous in the digital world. What if people don't understand this? Will it be used irresponsibly? I really don't care anymore. Partially because I've seen where that confusion can take people in the classroom. It's a good confusion. It's chaotic, it's exuberant, and it's productive. New truths emerge alongside a lot of dead ends, but it's worth it. That's all part of giving up the gatekeeper role our profession played for too long. We give that up in our reading rooms, but now we need to continue that online and in our classrooms. But I'm not too naive about that. We're still being gatekeepers, no matter how hard we try to escape it. It's not so much in whom we let use the materials or how we let them use them, but in what materials we have in the first place. The gatekeeper function is in selection, what we allow into the collections in the first place. And we have to be so selective. We must pass by so much more than we can possibly save. For most of the second half of the 20th century, special collections went wild collecting. New historical methods and interests made us look at our collections and curse ourselves and our predecessors. We felt we'd been collecting all the wrong things. Our collections were built to support scholarship that was becoming less relevant, and we saw gaping holes everywhere. So we responded by trying to collect everything. And that resulted in 100-year processing backlogs for most of us. Now, even with Green-Meisner as a processing philosophy that allows us to provide adequate access much more quickly, we still can't collect everything. I want to return to that class on 3D printing, because it shows some of the good and some of the bad from exuberant chaos. We did this class using what I call a speed dating technique. It works well when we want to give students a lot of exposure, but not necessarily much depth. Basically, the students spend a little time getting to know many books in short, concentrated bursts of interaction. In this case, we only use 6 books. The first book, Eliason's Your House, we looked at as a group. I don't know how many of you have ever seen this book, but it's sort of one of these, it's an artist book that this guy measured very precisely a house, and then every page of this book represents, I think, 2 millimeters of that house. And each page is laser cut. And so we turned the pages, and the students made comments as we went. I thought it was perfect for 3D printing, because this is basically that exact layering that occurs with the 3D printer. The other thing I love about this book that I think was good for them to think about was that the house is only complete when the book is closed and you can't see it. As soon as you open the book to peer inside of it, the binding distorts it, right? So the house becomes this thing that isn't solid anymore, and it also isn't quite the shape of the house anymore, but you can figure out all the rooms. But only when it's closed completely does it exist in its pure form. Sort of like the cat and the what am I trying to say? That, you know, the cat with the, you guys all know what I'm talking about, with quantum physics or whatever. I'm a librarian, I don't. So we look at this book together, and then the other 5 books are laid out on tables, and the students move around in groups, spending about 8 minutes with each book, okay? So first, well, not first, because they're all moving. One of them is Remelin's Survey of the Microcosm, or the Anatomy of the Bodies of Man and Woman from 1702. This is a flat book that allows the students to tunnel into bodies, and the paper layers the skin and the organs. Then we have a first edition of Palladio from 1570. They're in Rauner Library at the time, Webster Hall, which is a neoclassical building. And they can look at the book, and they can look out in the reading room, and they can look at the book, and they can see exact parallels being played out. Then we used one of the volumes of plates from Diderot's Encyclopedia. We used the plates on printing set alongside some type to show the three-dimensionality of nearly two-dimensional printing. We were talking earlier about the bite of type. In 8 minutes, we did not get into the bite of type. Then we have James Hogben's Obstetric Studies from 1812. This is another flat book. This one's for midwives to show the various presentations of a baby during birth. And in this case, being such a modern book, how best to position the forceps to extract it. And then Ramelli's Diverse and Artificial Machines from 1588. This is always a favorite. Most of the students in this class were engineering students. I thought they would totally love it. It's Ramelli's fanciful machines that seem perfect for a class that's being asked to make basically something out of nothing. And I love this last image because I think this is Ramelli's version of speed dating books. As the students worked directly with the materials, the faculty member and I milled around. We usually do this to steer them if they're going awry, or add a little context if they look too baffled. But we didn't really have to do anything. The students were very busy interacting with the books, playing with them, and having what appeared to be revelatory moments. With 10 minutes left in the class, it's a 65-minute class. With 10 minutes left in the class, we stopped, and we asked the students what they saw that they could apply to their projects. After 55 minutes of raucous excitement, we faced a room of total silence. I am very patient in those situations. I'll wait it out. I'll count slowly in my head to 30. Someone always speaks before I get there. When I get to the mid-20s, when I was beginning to squirm as much as the students were, one of them offered up, "I liked the way the books represented interior space." Well, it was a start, but not really what I was hoping for. Things did not get much better after that, and we had a halting, fairly shallow discussion. Something about the structure of the session, the materials we selected, or the expectations the students brought with them made them unable to make the turn to the practical. They loved the stuff, but they were not able to do anything other than marvel at it. They might just have needed more time to process what they saw. But at the moment, it sure felt like it had been a waste of time. And I so wanted to tell them how it applied, to answer my own question. But I didn't. I think that would have only made me feel better rather than enhance their learning. The jury's still out on whether or not this was a failure. We'll not really know until they produce their final projects, and the faculty member is able to see if anything from the class became manifest. Dartmouth is full of high-achieving students. The school does a very good job of attracting adventurous thinkers, students who are game to try new ideas. But they're also terrified of failure. These have always been top students, and fear of offering up something that is wrong can silence them and stifle the effectiveness of the chaotic approach. Failure is part of the process of learning, and we need to keep that failure acceptable in the classroom. I may have just positioned the conversation poorly, so they were afraid of being wrong, and that kept them silent. Perhaps if we'd not looked at one book carefully at the start, they would have felt more free to experiment with their ideas. I'm not really sure, but I would not call the class a success, even though it was a lot of fun for me and for the students. The exuberant chaos of the classroom is how we approach so much of our work. Let the interactions occur and see where they go. Collect things we think will be useful. Sometimes they flop, but most of the time they work. But the important thing is that we position our collections so that they can serve the people in the best way. For Dartmouth, this meant shifting our structure as a department and realigning our focus. Returning to the original metaphor of special collections as a meal, there's a diner, Lou's, in Hanover that is popular with the students. It opened right after World War II and has fed generations of them. There's nothing fancy about it. The beef is not grass-fed. I don't think there's anything consciously organic on the menu. But the food is all made from scratch, and it has an authenticity that's really appealing. The place doesn't have any pretensions, and people do not feel special going there. But they always get a good meal. That should be our philosophy with our collections. Stop treating them like fine dining, and think of them as basic nutrition for the scholarly world and for our students. The work we do with classes is not a bit of extra credit or a treat to celebrate the end of the term. It should be the meat of the course. Interactions with materials to make abstract concepts concrete and further the goals of the class. But as an added bonus, for most students, it is the sweetest moment of the day. Thank you. Yep, questions? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for a great talk. I'm Jeff Resnick. I'm from the National Library of Medicine on the campus of the National Institutes of Health. So your talk was infused by medical themes, and you've ended on a nutrition note. With regard to the wonderful, wonderful content you described relating to the inoculation of smallpox and then also to the flap books, can you say more about say less about the chaotic exuberance and more about the real power of those sources to push disciplinary boundaries? Those sources exist within the classroom at an intersection called medical humanities, one could argue, as opposed to history of medicine, although it's that too. Can you say more about that?
Yeah,
because I think you're spot on, and the power of those artifacts, the power of those texts and images sitting at that intersection allows you in the classroom to push those disciplinary boundaries. And if you say more about that, because it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that you're doing.
Yeah, the first time I used this session, when I built it out for a freshman seminar in anthropology called The Anthropology of Medicine. So I went it was the medical humanities. And I actually presented these exact same materials about 3 weeks ago to Dartmouth got a Mellon grant to explore the medical humanities, and I spoke to the group of people who are that grant, who are participating in that grant. And we looked at these materials to talk about that, how that works. But with this little batch, you can use it in a lot of different settings. And we have another one that's far more gruesome, but doesn't draw quite as well from all the different collections on grave robbing. Because Dartmouth has a long, long tradition of grave robbing to supply the medical school in the 19th century. And we have a lot of documents about that. And it's a great way to sort of look at medical history and see that interaction. So yeah, we really like it when these things can do, these teachable packages we create, we really try to have them so they do a lot of different work for us. We want to be able to repackage that. We have to be careful, though, because I might do this for a freshman writing seminar, and then some upper level class comes in, and one of the students was actually in that class. So we sort of have to watch out. We have to, and every now and then I will ask the faculty member, if this seems like the perfect thing, I'll say, can you ask your students if any of them were in freshman writing 2 years ago with so-and-so? And if they haven't, then I can go ahead and do it. But yeah, we do that with a lot of different things. We try to build out, we used a whole bunch of things about a student who was class of 41, must have been, yeah, class of 41. And he was like the big man on campus. He was the captain of the football team and the captain of the basketball team. Took him to the NCAA Final Four, which seems kind of bizarre for Dartmouth. Went off to the war and gets killed. And he was a poet, too, and we have his poetry. So we have this kind of thing where they build out this guy's life in the same kind of way. And for that one, we have originally developed it for helping students read The English Patient, which is a disjointed story where you keep getting weird clues from here and here and here, and you have to piece them all together to make it make sense. And what we wanted to do was create a classroom experience where they had a story, but the story was just everywhere. And they had to pick out the right pieces to make the story make sense. So yeah, it really fits with a good liberal arts education, this kind of work. So,
thank you.
Yep. Hey.
Hi, my name is Patrina Jackson. I'm from the University of Virginia.
Yeah.
And you stated that you gave a fantastic talk. Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
Thanks.
And you stated that 1/3 of your undergraduate population has had meaningful interactions with special collections
In 1 year.
in 1 year.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, can you give us 3 specific actions that you took to increase your number of class requests?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can give you like 25.
Well, that'd be fine
but,
too.
But the first one was really, really simple and really basic. When I arrived at Dartmouth, I got myself invited to every departmental faculty meeting I possibly could. And I would bring to that department meeting 2 or 3 items that I knew would blow them away. And so I walked into the English department was the first one I did, sort of the natural, right? I walked in and I had James Joyce in parts as in the little review. I had an early edition of Chaucer with these crazy woodcuts in it. And I had 3 things. I can't remember what the third one was. But anyway, what I did was say, and I had the first edition of Ulysses. And I said, you can tell your students all about the sort of literary situation that gave birth to Ulysses, or you can have them just open up the little review and see how it's being published and who it's being published alongside and all those networks that are being created. And then you can look at that first edition and you can suddenly take your long lecture and you can get the students to figure that out in about 20 minutes of class time probably. And that kind of approach. So I went around to different departments doing exactly that, taking things that I knew would really appeal to that department and talking about how a session in special collections can make you a better teacher of this concept that is a very important concept that you want to do. So that was the first thing. The other thing is we established a really great relationship with DCAL. DCAL is D would be Dartmouth. Dartmouth Center for the Advancement of Learning is what it's called. And that's our think tank for teaching and learning. And lots of faculty, Dartmouth is great, a lot of faculty members really participate heavily in DCAL. And so we got a really good relationship with DCAL and started doing sessions in DCAL on integrating rare and unique materials into your class. But then for Dartmouth, the biggest thing was we really got a lot of success the first year. We had a lot of faculty members who had a really great experience with us. And on a campus like Dartmouth, word travels really fast. It's a cliquey place, it's because it's small and it's isolated. And so, one person in the German department had a great class and suddenly I've got 4 people from the German class saying, what can you do for me, right? And so we worked with that. But then the other thing was that structural one. Peter Carini and Peter was just as game about this stuff as I was. And so we were just like networking all through the campus to make this work. And then we poured a ton of energy into it to make those class sessions work and make every one of those be something special. And we emphasized over and over and over again that what we're doing in the classroom has to do with furthering specific goals on your syllabus, right? We are not here just to show them cool stuff. And we are not here to give them a treat. We are here to take an idea on your syllabus, something that you want them to learn, and make them learn it faster and better and with more depth. And that pretty much worked for us. But I think it's going to be different at every institution. Sort of depends on how it's set up. You're just over there saying that wouldn't work here. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Janine Pollock from the Free Library of Philadelphia Public Library, and I guess I enjoyed your talk, and I appreciate you using an example that didn't quite work or that needs more work in order to, that I think that's very useful too, as useful as things that are, sort of viral and really make us, stop and really cheer. But I guess the question is whether you or any, I would open it up to anybody, are under pressure for results. Like coming from a public library, and we're dealing with primary and secondary students, it's, maybe would be a little bit more clear of if something works and something doesn't in terms of the outcomes and the grades and the literacy levels and things like that. And I was just wondering if there are statistics, or are we keeping track of all of this?
And yeah, but not very well, because we don't have control over we have control over the class for that little tiny bit, right? And so we often, for classes that we work extensively with throughout the term, we'll almost always get a couple questions on the course evaluation on the end based on how are your Rauner experiences, kind of things. And we'll ask some specific things there, so we can get really good feedback for those. We get an awful lot of great stories from faculty. And those work pretty well, because you can collect those stories from faculty saying, I taught this class 23 times, and this was the best time ever, and I think it's because this happened. And so we collect those stories that we can present to the provost. And right now, in fact, we're really making a big push to change our footprint on campus. Our main reading room will be in the same place, but we're trying to take over a huge chunk of campus, and so that every single thing in our collections will be housed on campus and have less than 15 minutes paging, right? Yeah. And the case we're making is curricular, right? And we're using those stories from faculty who say, I love making assignments using special collections, but if it takes a day to get the thing, I'm not going to make the assignment, because these are undergraduates, right? They're going to write the paper the day before it's due. So we're making the case that 15-minute paging is essential for the quality of education for the Dartmouth students. And we're using faculty testimonials to do that. But no, we don't have like a great metric, for measuring this stuff before and after the class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Out of curiosity, how do you teach the students, particularly the freshmen and so on, to handle some of these items that you're using?
Yeah. This wasn't the microphone, so I'll repeat it. How do we teach the students how to handle this stuff? This might be sacrilege to so many people in the room. We're pretty free and easy with this stuff. These things, with those letters, the documents, we'll slip those into a Mylar sleeve. And that works really well for a class session. With the books, we show them how a cradle works, and we say, keep the book in the cradle. But we have everything in our collections is there to be used, and I don't want to waste a single dime of Dartmouth's money on something that isn't going to be in the hands of somebody. And I would rather have a book used to death than not used at all. And generally speaking, our preservation department, our conservator, is so fabulous that she can fix anything we break. I am on the absurdly loose end of the sort of access versus protection of the material. I have little fights with my staff about it. It's a continuum, and we're all in different spots on the continuum. And every now and then, somebody calls me on something, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, I really did, and we move back a little bit. But yeah, I really want this stuff in their hands. Nothing bad has happened. It's been 10 years with like this really intensive teaching. And I don't think that there's anything that in the collection that's been damaged. The stuff is pretty sturdy. Good old paper can take an awful lot. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about partnerships you've made within your library. I feel like to become the meal, we need to partner with our subject specialists and our technology folks, and I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Oh yeah, thanks. That's that's another one of those 3 things you can do. Make friends with all the subject specialists in your library, because they can turn you on to classes that you didn't know about, because they're seeing more syllabi than you are probably. We work a lot with several of the subject specialists co-teaching classes. Every now and then there's somebody who wants a session where it has one of these primary source exercises, but then they also they really want the students to get a really good sense during, like in a 2-hour class, of how do you take that out, right? How do you take that out to the secondary sources, and how do you build it? And so we'll co-teach that class with the subject bibliographer. And so while during that part at the end where we're building the narrative and where wild assumptions are being made, the subject librarian will be sitting there on the computer, like pulling up really great sources that can direct us in that. And so we can see these, how all of the whole library works together. Other ways we do it, well, during those initial meetings that I had with the faculty departments, the department faculty meetings, I always went with the subject specialist from the library. I always made sure that the two of us went, so that we could sort of represent the library and special collections. And that just forms a lot of really great bonds that then you can work with as you go. It also, like Laura Bronstein, who's the English bibliographer, she can do a lot of these sessions now. And sometimes Morgan, Peter, and I get completely overwhelmed, and we need to call on her to help. Yeah. Okay. Time for another question? Nobody's going to lambaste me for dumping the curatorial model? Okay. All right, great. Thank you much.